conversation today, and I've heard from many people who are also excited. As you join us, though, as you're logging on, if you could go ahead and pop something in the chat to let us know that you're here, just maybe your name, where you're from. You could even just your favorite emoji. We just want to make sure we have some people joining us and that everything's working on our technological front before we dive into conversation today. I already see some coming in. Megan saying hello from Phoenix. So we're up and running. Thank you so much. This is going to be a great conversation. I know at Pet Partners, we love to talk about the human animal bond, human animal interaction, and to talk with people who are truly leading the field, which is who we have with us today. So I'm going to jump right in. Have two representatives from ISAZ with us today. You might have seen that acronym, and it is the International Society for Anthrozoology. So ISAZ is a great friend of Pet Partners. We do a lot of wonderful work together, and every time there's an ISAZ conference, we're there. So we're so excited to have this conversation. More hellos coming in from Karen and Eve. Thank you for letting us know. I would like to start off by just allowing both of you to introduce yourself. We want to hear about who you are, your professional background, your passion for this work, and also, of course, your role with ISAZ. So if you could just let us know who you are, we would love that.
Dr. Pendry,
that sounds good. Sure, I'll lead us off. So my name is Patricia Pendry. I am an associate professor in human development and also graduate faculty of prevention science at Washington State University, which is in Pullman, Washington, out west. And I am also currently the president of ISAZ. And I want to start by saying thank you so much to all of you for hosting us today. I am personally just delighted to be able to be here and introduce myself and learn more about your members. As you can probably see, I don't know if that slide is up, but in my work, I frequently work with our local, or it's actually a regional pet partner, in a lot of the research that we do. So I want to give a little shout out to Palouse Paws, the regional pet partner that we work with. On this image, you also see a couple of members of my team. Most of these are graduate students in prevention science. And then Nancy G, who you probably know as well. So over the last, I don't know how many years, but quite a few years, 5-6 years, I've been actively working with pet partners, and I'm thrilled to be here. And hopefully I could just do a little plug for our own pet partners who were engaged in this research. If we could flip it to the next slide. I should have actually also put handlers in there, but I'm going to go with our canine representatives from our work at WSU. So hope you could take a peek at them and meet them, and you could see we have just a wonderful team. And I'm, like I say, delighted to have the opportunity to work with them. So thank you for that. John Tyler.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to be here, and thanks to Pet Partners for having us and sort of showcasing ISAZ and some of the good work that we do there. I'm John Tyler Binfet. I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of British Columbia, and I run a little, not so little program called BARC, Building Academic Retention Through Canines. And this is really a stress reduction canine visitation program on campus. I'm proud to announce that we're in our 10th year. So we've been at this for a while. We have 60 registered teams who come to campus for a variety of different protocols. And so our handlers are just we are so grateful for our handlers. We don't, unfortunately, like Dr. Pendry, have access to regional teams up here in Canada where we are. And so we take a bit of a different approach. But Taylor had asked at the beginning sort of my professional background, and so I'm a psychologist by training. And, as I started this faculty position, I really wanted to do research that would bring me joy. And so I'm a kindness researcher, and so I predominantly work with children, and then my side gig is working with dogs, and these are my 3 dogs who work on campus, and they're all characters, of course, and I work with dogs that have had trauma predominantly, and if they so choose, they'll work in protocols, but that's not always the case. But yeah, so a psychologist by training, and then like Dr. Pendry, I am just really intellectually curious about exploring the connection between undergraduate students predominantly and their well-being after spending time with dogs. And that's really, you know, that photo and the other photo of a student with a dog is really key. You couldn't replace the dog with a human and get the same affective response from people. So you all know, and I know you don't need convincing on this, but the dogs do work that people struggle to sometimes do psychologically. So I'm excited to be here, and open book. If you have questions, fire them away. And I know Dr. Pendry and I are curious to share information about ISAZ and about the work that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And exactly, if you have questions throughout, please put them in the chat. We are welcome any question, whether it be about something we're talking about professionally or research or ISAZ, or even just a personal story that you want to share. Put it in. We like this to be a conversation, but you can see why we're so excited to have these two here today. Not only people who are really champions for this thing that we believe so much in, but also just that appreciation for all of you handlers out there. You can see that people who are working each day to research this intervention really see you and acknowledge the work that you do. So we are also thankful for that. It wouldn't be possible without all of our handlers. So now I want to shift focus a little bit to learn more about ISAZ. I know we've talked a little bit about what ISAZ means, what it stands for, but can you tell us more about what the organization is, who belongs to the organization, and what are your services? And then maybe we can wrap around to talking about how this pet partners community could be involved with the wonderful work that ISAZ does.
Sure, absolutely. The mission of ISAZ really is to serve the growing community of scholars and scientists who are working in the field of anthrozoology. And that's really just the study of human-animal interactions as well as relationships. And so our organization supports research and also publishes and disseminates research findings, both to researchers, but also to the public at large. And so we're very interested in sort of doing what we can to promote the exchange of knowledge, but also to provide expertise within the field and raise that expertise. I mean, you mentioned earlier, for example, that we really notice you as handlers. And similarly, as Dr. Binford was referring to this idea of the role of the animal in those interactions. And I think we're always sort of feeling like, okay, we're preaching to the choir a little bit. And so what we are trying to do is to, not just do and support good research, but also to do this in ways and communicate those findings to people who maybe aren't on the ground with you, people who maybe don't see what animals bring to the table, folks who are skeptical about the role of animals in providing this kind of support. So we're really trying to, test the assumptions, but also to share that evidence and do good research to demonstrate these effects that probably we all see occurring on a regular basis.
I would echo. Yeah, can I echo Dr. Pendry too, that ISAZ is really a platform that unites researchers with practitioners. And so what's really kind of cool about a lot of the research that's presented at ISAZ, it was grounded or anchored in pet partner handlers. Many of the protocols, the research that's shared is, it has derivative sort of connections to pet partners. So that's pretty lovely. But sort of coming back to this idea that it's a really good way to get informed about the field, and then also to steal some applied kind of takeaways, whether it's around positioning the dog to increase access, or Dr. Pendry's work does really interesting stuff around the physiological or biomarker indicators of well-being that arise, and then I do some kind of observational and physical touch stuff, and there's just a lot there that I think the handler could be informed, because we think good science feeds good practice, right? And so I think there's a lot of takeaways from ISAZ where you unite research. The other really cool thing about ISAZ is all these researchers like Dr. Pendry and I are available today and accessible to you through Pet Partners, but at ISAZ, you're just arm's length away from all these wonderful top-notch researchers, and you can ask them questions, and you can really kind of sort of feed your intellectual curiosity about how to do the work you want to really strive to do. So that's my plug on there.
Yes, I love it. And it's something we talk about so often at Pet Partners about not only making us better as handlers, we all want to do best by our animals and to do this intervention the best way possible. But like you said, Dr. Pendry, when we want people to take this seriously, there's such a tendency, if you're not someone who's bought in, to think this is just something that's feel good or not to really appreciate the science behind this. So all of the handlers joining today, as we talk about research later on, I always encourage you to grab something for your elevator speech so that we can really talk about what we're doing in a way that impresses people because what we're doing is impressive. So, and there are so many ways you at Pet Partners can get involved. I will say, I know I plugged it already, but the conference that ISAZ has is just wonderful. I've had them in person and virtually this past year, and I learned so much every time. And that is something that's certainly available to everyone, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I would say, if you think about just learning a little bit more about the organization itself, and then kind of take a look at what we do on Twitter and what we do on Facebook. We have a journal called Anthrozoology, and in it you find research on really such a great variety of HAI topics. And I have to say, I want to make sure that people understand we are not an organization that only focuses on AAIs or only focuses on canines. We're a very broad organization. We both draw from a lot of different disciplines. So it's a very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary field. But also, we also, study things like how do people engage with zoos or with wildlife, or how do we translate findings to the public? We work with all kinds of species, all kinds of different methodological approaches. And, AAIs are one piece of it. There's a huge range of work represented just on studying the human-animal bond in and of itself. So I think we're very eager to sort of talk about how we link to Pet Partners. And I bet a lot of your members also have interest beyond Pet Partners and beyond AAIs. I mean, I think it's probably fair to say that we're all animal lovers and interested in understanding the role animals have in our lives. So social media, always nice to take a peek at not just ISAZ as an organization or looking at what we're doing at our conferences, but yeah, take a look at our journal. And we try to sort of put out information that we think is relevant, particularly for the public at large.
Absolutely. I think one of the most interesting, like if you have a group of people for a dinner party, it's at an ISAZ conference. You have so many people from different fields, but all with that same, kind of kindred spirit in terms of loving animals. So there's so much to check out. And we'll have the link there in the comments for you to find out more about these resources. I see also want to acknowledge some more hellos coming in as we're talking. Any of our handlers having questions throughout, again, feel free to type them in and let us know. I'd like to ask a question that we like to ask all leaders of the field who get to visit us on these Facebook Lives. I would like to hear about the greatest thing that each of you has gained from your experiences at ISAZ and or in the field in general. Can be personally or professionally, but tell us what really motivates you and what's been that really most encouraging takeaway thus far.
How about I'll jump in, Dr. Pendry, if that's okay. I sort of liken it, it's akin to playing tennis at a really good tournament, because you are intellectually volleying with really quick thinkers and people who have really immersed themselves in the research. So it sort of forces you to up your own intellectual and applied and methodological practice. So to me, I just always feel just refueled and just invigorated by attending ISAZ. And the other thing is it's really creative too. You have a lot of really creative researchers, and you'll attend a session and you'll think, my gosh, typically you think, why didn't I think of that, right? That's the highest compliment, I think, to any researcher, where you're always like, dang, why didn't I think of that? Or that's such an unusual or different way. And oftentimes it could be very simple, but the methodological approach. So, I liken it to a tennis tournament where you prepare intellectually to attend, but once you're there, you've got a lot of information coming at you and you up your game. And to me, I just leave a richer, more informed scholar.
That's great. Well said. The piece I thought about was kind of how I got into this field and just kind of thinking about the way in which academics tend to think about their careers. And it's hard to become an academic. Let's face it, it's not easy. There's a lot of work to be done. And then when you're there, you obviously are interested in doing good research, but you also want to enjoy your day to day, and you want to have, conduct research that's relevant to people's lives, but also to one's own life. And I realized at some point after I kind of got settled and the dust settled around my new office and my new position and all that, I was really thinking, okay, what is the kind of research I really want to do? I've always studied stress, particularly the physiology of stress and how does stress get under the skin. And I was doing a little brainstorming exercise for free association. What do I really want to do? And I kept getting interrupted with images of myself growing up with my animal and riding horses and doing different things. And I kept sort of slapping myself on the cheek and saying, stop it, focus on this research, And then at some point I said, okay, come on already. This keeps coming back. And it just made me realize not just understanding how stress happens and what changes in our body, but suddenly I'm like, wait a second. Obviously, it's right here in front of me. How can we alleviate stress? Let's move on and do something about it. And let's examine ways in which we can do this in sort of using an approach that's really dear to me individually and personally. So, I've done some work on equine assisted interventions because those were, growing up, I grew up with horses. But the idea that you do something that is a day-to-day presence in our lives, and I'm sure that's true for Dr. Binfet as well. I mean, he's clearly an animal lover and has animals, and to be able to combine that with research and make a career out of it. I mean, you can't find anything better as far as I'm concerned. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm fortunate, like Dr. Pendry, to be covered in dog hair most days. And I see that as just such a gift. My laboratory is one that's, a really joyful place to be. And that's so important. And I love that Dr. Pendry brought that up, that, our jobs are really to decrease stress, predominantly in a college population. But it also, the flip side is that we increase joy. And I think that by pursuing this research trajectory, we're both sort of seeking joy professionally. I'll tell you, I came to campus here 10 years ago and had worked in a program in Southern California in a residential treatment facility for adolescents with traumatic and acquired brain injury. And I was just a volunteer. And so I had my dog, and we go every Saturday and whatnot. And I moved up to Canada to take a faculty position, and I'd go across campus every day and get a cup of coffee, and I would be besieged by students, right? And it was always the same choreography. They'd go right to the dog, they'd ignore me completely, and then they'd look up with these tear-filled eyes, and they'd say, as much as I miss my parents, I miss my dog more. Mm-hmm. And that was my aha moment, where I thought, okay, we got to increase access to animals on campus. It can be a really lonely place for a lot of kids. So that was kind of my sort of pushing the universe, kind of saying, hey, you've got the skills to bring this together, off you go.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We have so many teams who do get to volunteer at campuses all over the country. So I know they can relate, and I'll bring up that same question. For those of you who are joining us today, we talked even in beginning and talking about the greatest thing we've gotten as people who work in this field is often related to that motivation we share when we see the work that other people are doing. So again, feel free, even if you'd like to share in the chat, maybe the most compelling thing you've witnessed as a therapy dog handler. It warms our heart to read that. So put it in there if you'd like. I saw a slide come up, and I do want to talk a little bit more about research. As a researcher, I'm right there share with you. I know some people are like want to check out. I promise this will be a fun conversation. Research is the best, and this will be something that can inform your elevator speech. But I'd like to ask you both to speak about some of the most compelling research that you've seen lately. Maybe you could talk us through some of that.
Yeah, so, I know I was sort of anticipating that question, and I really did, how you're in the shower in the morning, you're thinking, how am I going to answer that? What are some questions that I might want to answer? And that there's such a broad sort of, let's say, body of work to consider, and it's really hard to pick something. So I think what is most important to consider is that overall, we are increasing, I would say, the methodological rigor and increasing research designs that can really get at that causal question. Is it really causing what we think? Is it causal, or are these things just kind of hanging together and it's just all a coincidence? Now, I think probably amongst us, we all sort of feel like, no, we see what happens, right? We believe that this is causal, but to demonstrate it, especially to people who aren't convinced, I think that is a real challenge. And so I think as a field, if you look over the last 5 years or the last 10 years, I think we have come a long way in using very strong scientific gold standard designs, like particularly if you're interested in a causal question, right? We do randomized controlled trials. We have larger samples than we ever did before. We look at sort of multiple different outcomes. We look at both people's perception, but also at what happens under the skin. And we combine that to sort of shape an impression. And we look bidirectionally as well. We incorporate not just what's good for people. No, we look at the dynamic nowadays between the handler and the animal, the student and the animal, but also the student and the handler, right? We're taking a very sort of what we refer to as a triadic kind of approach. We're looking at all of the different contributions. And I don't think we used to do that as well. So I'm excited about the regular general quality being increased and really bringing rigor so that we better understand what's happening, what the effects are, and what underlies it. Is it touch? Is it social support? Is it 5 minutes of petting? Or is it certain kinds of dogs, certain kinds of handlers? What's driving this? And that's exciting about the field today.
Well, and I think that's just it. This idea that Dr. Pendry and I, our job is kind of to push the field forward, and ISAZ gives us a kind of a platform to showcase that research, as does Anthrozoology, the journal. But and I'm biased too. I'm like Dr. Pendry. I run these randomized controlled trials. That's kind of my go-to methodology. But increasingly, we see showcased at ISAZ too, semi-structured interviews or case studies, and that's different. That's not where we're randomly assigning participants to treatment or control, spend time with the dog, don't spend time with the dog, that kind of thing. But this is sort of asking the participant, hey, little friend, what does your dog mean to you? Well, tell us about a typical day. And, Taylor, you had kind of prompted the question, what's some research? And there's new research by Louise Scanlon out of the University of Nottingham, where she looked at the connection between homeless individuals and their dogs, right? Through this semi-structured interview, sat down and talked about them. And she talks about this mutual rescue narrative where the dogs rescue the individual, but the individual is rescued by the dog. Like, really interesting stuff. So Dr. Pendry and I are both open to qualitative work because it's that complementary piece that tells the story, right? And we need more research about the stories of handlers and about what it means to handlers to participate and to be helping these clients over and over in different settings. And we want to know about the experience of the dogs. And increasingly at ISAZ, you're going to hear about animal welfare issues and about consent. Is the animal willingly participating in this research? And so we see this broad array of topics that I think a lot of pet partner handlers would be curious to learn about. But animal consent is a big one of late, and I would say diversity in terms of species being encouraged to incorporate into these programs, and then also diversity in terms of who's being served or who's being helped. Is it just white college kids in affluent campuses, or is it for really an intervention for everybody? So these are kind of some of the questions that we grapple with.
Yep. Those are great points. And some of the topics that are near and dear to our heart as well as many of you know, we have a relationship with HABRI, the Human Animal Bond Research Institute, to fund some studies on therapy animal interventions. And we're always looking for more studies that look at diverse species, that look at increasing diversity in who we serve and as volunteers and as people who are passionate about this intervention. So a lot of those things that you might see when we announce in our press release, hey, we have funding coming out and here's what we're looking for, it's because we're following the leadership of researchers like we have here today. So it's good to see that kind of full circle moment. I see we have a comment from one of our very, very famous therapy dog teams, Bellin, being told by a child that Bellin helped teach them it's still okay to smile while trying to process high-level trauma such as abuse or grief or loss. Yes, exactly. It's so hard to some of those really complex things that take place. That's a hard thing to measure. I like how you said, you know, to be openness to qualitative research there too. I'm biased as a qualitative researcher, but you know, there's just some really complex things that happen in these interactions that we often don't have the words for. So,
well, Taylor, if I can jump in, I think
so go ahead.
Bellin's comment really illustrates sort of the talents of these handlers that they bring forward, that they're sort of hit with these emotional bricks, right? And they keep rolling on and keep supporting, and the dogs do the heavy lifting, but the handlers play such a key role. And Bellin's comment is, I think, illustrates that the complexity of some of the work.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I was thinking about the word holistic, right? Like I feel like our field research-wide is moving into a more holistic space. So, for example, in some studies that we've done, number one, as researchers, if you go and do the pet partner training, you gain a whole new realm of respect, right? And talking with handlers just about sort of all the work that they do to prepare their animals and seeing that happen, right? Before you actually show up, there's a lot that goes into that. But also looking at very specific type of behavior. So one of the things that we've done is I'm a little scared to mention it because I think we have 28,000 minutes of observational data that we are coding exactly, how many times is their tail wagging, who initiates the intervention, the touching or the greeting, what exactly is it that the handler is doing? And then we also interview the handlers. How are they feeling when they leave? How did they feel about their animal? Because sometimes we see animals responding differently than one might want as a handler. And that's not always, expected. And it's also not always bad. But, to really think about what makes the handler enjoy that experience and feel like they're being effective, and what do they value, what do they foster in their animal, and how do they respond to these different scenarios. As Dr. Binford said, yeah, you're thrown a brick sometimes, right? And learning how to respond, or just intuitively knowing how to respond best. That doesn't just come, with just training or just an overnight experience. That's a result of, being a regular handler and putting yourself out there on a regular basis. And we want to understand what that process is like for the handlers and how to characterize it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that comment, Bellin. See, we have a lot of great conversation when we get our handlers involved. Before I ask our guest our last question, I do want to make sure anyone joining us, if you have any questions, put them in before we leave. If you have questions about the work, the research, or even just about maybe their pets, feel free to ask. My last question for you, though, we've talked a lot about how, thankfully, our field and the field of HAI, AAI, it's growing so much and so quickly. And so what are your hopes for where this field will go?
Who's jumping in? You?
Go to it.
Okay. My hopes for the field. My hope is it remains creative. I hope that it becomes increasingly diverse. I hope that the good science is going to sort of solidify the importance of creating opportunities for people from all sorts of different backgrounds to have opportunities to spend time with animals. I think in our technologically driven world, there are folks who are kind of functioning without any contact with animals, and I think I'm saddened by that. So my hope is that we can have let science speak for itself, and that people will realize the importance of this, and we'll see maybe animals integrated into our lives in varied ways that are good for everybody. Dr. Pendry.
Well said. I would share all of those considerations, and I sort of hesitate a little bit because I was just thinking about to what extent we can, expand access, to animals, and I say that while being mindful about your earlier comments too. That as you all know, you're your animals advocate, and within the context of AAIs, that's a very important consideration that I know you all, hold dear. And so I sort of feel sometimes like there needs to be recognition that these teams of people that come and visit, or that, whether it's on campus or elsewhere, they're a precious resource, right? And we want to use is not the right word, but we want to engage with them in a way that respects that this is a precious, scarce resource, and to consider the well-being of the animals as well as the handlers. And I think, creating some dialogue about how to expand, but not to overdo it, so that we're, using this resource that is so precious in ways that isn't sound for the parties involved, and that only looks at providing that momentary joy. There has to be a balance to make sure, and I feel like there's some work to be done to formalize that, and to study that, and to understand that, because the natural inclination is to scale up. Oh, let's do this more often. Let's bring in more animals. Let's bring in other species. Let's do, and so I think we need to be mindful, understand it before we go hog wild on implementing this without consideration.
Yeah, that is a great point. How do we protect what we're doing as we move forward? And as you know, we're working with delicate beings or complex beings, and both with the people and the animals. And so keeping that rigor high as we grow is going to be so important. I do see some questions coming in, though, so want to take a moment to share them. Sandy asked if you take into consideration how the dog and their handler interact during a visit. And Sandy mentioned, for Pet Partners teams, we're very trained to be hands-on, to offer reassurance, to be monitoring our animals at all time and giving them that advocacy. So would love for either of you to respond to that, about how you take into account how the duo is working together.
I'll maybe jump in here. When we register our teams, and we are, operate at a smaller scale than Pet Partners, certainly, but with our 60 dogs, they go through a whole training protocol, starting with just the handler with no dog, and then we do practice sessions, and then we actually do an internship where the seasoned handlers will help guide the new handlers, and then we have somebody monitoring canine welfare the whole time. And our dogs never operate or participate without the handler immediately present. So that's our kind of model. But folks who are curious about the BARC program can always just go to the website bark.ok.ubc.ca, and it's all on there, kind of illustrates it. Dr. Pendry, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say, you should do plug is a big word, but I think people should take a look at your book as well, where you provide some really nice tools, to consider exactly those types of questions. What goes into selecting the right suitable animal, or having the animal have some opportunity to voice what it wants to do. And then also looking at, again, some very specific tools that can help, create a good experience for all parties involved. I would say for our own work, I work with Pet Partners and our regional partner, because I feel like I don't always have that expertise that the handler has about their animal. And so I sort of am guided by the fact that they've gone through this process. They are registered. I know I've never had a problem with the team. I know what I'm getting, so to speak. And then, from a research perspective, we are developing some sort of observational tools to see how things work out on the ground during the program, right? There's obviously always things in place, particularly with our teams, where there's someone who's paying attention to make sure that if an animal needs a break, they receive it. There's great procedures within the pet partner paradigm to protect the animal's well-being, always being leashed, always being present. I mean, so, but there's more to that from a research perspective as well. So we've developed some tools to look at the quality of the interaction, and like I say, I mentioned 28,000 minutes of observations. We're not quite done yet, but we're hoping to formalize that so that handlers can also participate in giving us some feedback about what they think is relevant, right? What are some of the things we're looking for that maybe they say, well, it would be really nice to also consider these and these types of behavior. So I think we're collaborating well together to develop tools to improve the quality for all. And then also to be effective in the goals that we set out, right? It's different to spend 10 minutes where you just meet and greet versus a 6-week long program where you have some very specific goal for some very specific populations, and that needs to be brought to the foreground.
Yeah. Wonderful. I can't wait to see the findings of all of that coding that you referenced. That's going to be awesome. I see one more question. One more question coming in, and then we will say goodbye. I also see a shout out. So we have people looking forward to the creation of AAIP, or the Association for Animal Assisted Intervention Professionals, coming in January. So we are very excited about that. Thank you for your encouragement. Be able to get more and more professionals together and have conversations like this. But the last question we'll ask today, a question for you both. What advice would you give to a new researcher in the field, or to a handler who would like to get involved in the research side of things?
I'll jump in first if that's okay. I think good research is sort of nested within good mentorship. And so I would tell a young researcher, and ISAZ is a great sort of networking opportunity. And so I would say connect with fellow like-minded scholars, and as a young researcher, get plugged into a network. And again, ISAZ, attending the conference is a great way to do that, and find some sort of mentorship. The other kind of piece I would say is, I always am seeking students who have really strong mastery of the literature. They just need to know their kind of the bumpers on the bowling lane, but they need to know their bowling lane really, really well. And so I always advocate for just a deep immersion in the literature so that they're able to cite studies and know key findings and know seminal work in the field. And then that can be guided by a good mentor. Over to you, Dr. Pendry.
Well, I would say I'm sort of I'm big on methodology, research. I teach research design and methods, and different types of analytic approaches, and whether they are qualitative or quantitative doesn't really matter to me. It depends on the question that you're trying to answer. But I would say for researchers joining the field, I would say really, really strongly focus on research design and methods, because with that in your toolbox, you can essentially answer a variety of different research questions and never be limited by the design or the analytic skills that you bring to the table, where there's certain things where you're thinking, ooh, I would really like to do this, but I don't know how, right? And so I think that would be, certainly as a student, I would really, really impress on students to focus on methods. And yes, I think a good mentor is key. Work with folks who are passionate about mentoring you, right? We don't, as mentors, sometimes, there's some mentors who all they're interested in is sort of cloning themselves. I don't think that's a great setting. You want to teach people what they need to know to pursue their passion, and you can pursue it in so many different ways. So finding a good mentor is definitely very important. And then exposing yourself to everything and everything under the sun. Go to conferences, read everything you can find, talk to different people. And with regards to handlers getting interested in research, we've incorporated our handlers in a variety of different studies. We have some studies that are specific to the handler experience. And I think connecting with your sort of pet partner organization and putting yourself out there to find out if anybody's looking to conduct research on your experience, that's probably the best one can do, because you're sort of dependent on researchers reaching out to you. And I think we probably need to do a better job in that, because we would eagerly engage in that. So point well taken.
Well, some great advice, and for all the handlers watching, do keep a close eye on your inbox, because anytime a researcher comes to us, we review, make sure everything looks good about the study, and then share that invitation when they're looking for handlers. And if you're a researcher looking for handlers, please let us know, because we are very, very happy to help with recruitment. We have the best teams around who can really make your study everything that it can be. So I know we're coming up on the end of time. I thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I know I feel more excited. I'm like ready to go just get into the literature now. I know that's probably, I'm very nerdy in that way, but this has been such a good conversation, and to talk about how we come together, all the different roles that are within this field to really champion what we know to be true and to elevate this in all ways. So this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for having us. Thank you to your audience for having us and engaging with us. It's very much appreciated.
Yes, y'all have been great. We love your questions. Keep them coming on all the Facebook Lives in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.